Michigan's national nightmare came to an end this weekend. Hassan Haskins' 5 touchdowns led the number 5 Wolverines past Ohio State to keep them firmly cemented in the playoff conversation and are back in the Big Ten title game for the first time in 17 years. Later tonight, the playoff committee will release their latest rankings. CBS Sports senior college football writer Jerry Palm is predicting Georgia, Michigan, Alabama, and Cincinnati will round out the top 4 with Notre Dame and Oklahoma State very much alive and in the mix. And on that note, let's go ahead and bring in Jerry Palm. Let's start with Notre Dame. As we saw, their head coach, Brian Kelly, changed his Twitter bio. He's now the LSU head coach. They're just sitting around waiting to see how the conference title games shake out. With the news of Kelly leaving, does this play a factor in what the committee's thinking for their playoff chances?
No, the committee's not evaluating the coach. I mean, it's really more about what the players have done and what they've accomplished. So Kelly leaving doesn't have any impact on the committee's view of Notre Dame in terms of whether or not they'll make the playoff. It'll be based on their accomplishments this season so far, and then obviously how they relate relative to these other teams.
All right, the Fighting Irish have won 7 straight after losing to Cincinnati, finishing 11-1. They blew their final 4. They've blown out their final 4 opponents, allowing just 23 points in that stretch. Now, let's move over to Michigan. Michigan's a double-digit favorite in the Big Ten title game over Iowa. Looking ahead, where do you think they end up in the playoff picture?
Well, if Michigan wins, then there's a good chance they're number 2. And really the only reason they wouldn't be number 2 is if Alabama beats Georgia and Georgia still stays ahead of them, then Michigan could be 3. But if Michigan win, there's no way they're worse than 3, and they're much more likely to be 2.
Okay, how about Oklahoma State? The AP poll has Oklahoma State sitting at 5 after a little bedlam. When it's all said and done, do you think we see Mike Gundy and the Cowboys make their first trip to the playoffs?
Yeah, in my current projection, I have them sitting at number 4 in the playoff projection. Now, of course, they have to win first, and they need most likely Alabama to lose. They're the only team ahead of them that's an underdog. Jumping Notre Dame is not really a problem, I don't think, because 12-1 is going to be their 12-1 will be better than Notre Dame's 11-1. And Oklahoma State is a conference champion, and that's not unimportant to this committee. So, it's really the debate between a 2-loss Alabama, who may have come off a competitive game against Georgia, versus 12-1 Big 12 champion Oklahoma State. I think the committee leans Oklahoma State, but really, Alabama could get chosen just as well.
It's kind of crazy with all the chaos this past weekend between the coaches and the wins and losses. The storyline kind of getting lost in all this, and this past weekend especially, is Cincinnati. With all the movement, do the Bearcats really have any concerns of moving out of the Final Four? They're taking on Houston in the AAC title game this weekend.
Well, I guess conceivably, if Alabama stays ahead of them, Alabama beating Georgia is the worst case scenario for Cincinnati because Alabama, Georgia, and Michigan are all ahead of them. And then if you have 12-1 Oklahoma State, then the decision is 12-1 Oklahoma State from a major conference versus, 13-0 Cincinnati that beat Notre Dame but has a much weaker schedule overall. Notre Dame is not in the picture. Notre Dame pretty much needs Cincinnati to lose. But then that debate is a little bit iffy for Cincinnati. I think they still stick with Cincinnati, but that's the worst case scenario for the Bearcats.
Now, you did mention Alabama. May we see a controversial take here coming up? Let's say if Georgia and Alabama in the SEC title game this week. If Alabama loses that, is there any chance they can still make it? They didn't exactly pick up any style points this week in the Iron Bowl.
Well, and the committee they loved Alabama. The first few rankings loved Alabama. And then they've soured on them a little bit. And in fact, moved Ohio State ahead of them last week. I think they'll move Michigan into that spot this week. So, they're not in as much favor with the committee. But if they lose a competitive game, especially something that goes down to the wire, that may give them a little more hope. But if this is a 10-point game, Alabama's probably not going to make it with 2 losses.
All right, it's a big weekend for college football as we get those conference title games under wraps. Again, later tonight, the College Football Playoff Committee is going to put out the latest rankings, those newest top 4. Thank you, Jerry Palm, for joining us. For more on college football, make sure to check out the Cover 3 podcast with Hope Chip Patterson and Barton Simmons.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.